Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the future of media, 2016, the integrated age, and I think I'm going to talk, it's about innovation, so we're going to talk about a lot of things, but I would like to emphasise that everything we talk about today is actually practical now, so there's nothing particularly pie in the sky about what we're going to be saying. By way of introduction, I'm going to make some general points about media that I think will put the rest in context. The first thing is that obviously media today is global. I mean, if you look at social media, the likes of Facebook and Twitter, if you look at even things such as The Guardian, even things such as search, everything is global, and that has a tremendous impact in the way we construct media campaigns and in the way that messages are shared. The second thing I think that's significant is that it's increasingly integrated. It used to be, until really recently, you used to have a digital media person, you had a social media person, but I think in this day and age, solutions are not digital, they're not social, but they're media-based solutions, and that's, I think, an important theme running through my talk in particular, is that we need to look at solutions that are truly integrated and appropriate, not kind of like focus on digital or print or whatever. The third thing I do think is important is that the definition of innovation is making things better, and sometimes you do have this temptation for using media just because it is there or just because it's new. And I use this example. Does anyone recognise this screenshot? This is from something called Second Life. Now, just 6 or 7 years ago, people were spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on their Second Life islands for recruitment, just because it was new. In my opinion, it was never likely to work, and so we want to stay away from that kind of thing, I think. And it's also important to remember, I think, that the point of media in itself doesn't really have a point. You don't use media for media's sake. The point about media is connecting a candidate with a company, with a particular message. So it's all about connectivity, and again, we need to bear that in mind in everything we say. And finally, everyone's saying this at the moment, increasingly the audience is the media, and that is obviously true when it comes to things like social media. But when you look at younger generations, Generation Z in particular, they have a totally different attitude towards brand and media. They really appreciate the value that media can bring to their lives, and in this sense, they have a far closer connection. Now, I wanted to talk about media in 2016, and so to do that, I thought, I did study history at university, so I thought, well, let's look at the history of media. And I started off with this ad because I really like it, and it's from 1989 when I actually started in media, and no one ever told me whether this actually ran, but perhaps it did. But it does show the power of print media at the time, and it wasn't just generally, particularly in recruitment. 1989 was a brilliant year for media, and the print age as a whole was absolutely fantastic, and this is a great example of why print was so good. At the time, you had maybe 3 or 4 big media: Times, Telegraph, and to find a job you had to flick through every single page of the Times or the Telegraph, or the Guardian in this case. And so what enabled you to do was take your message out to people who weren't expecting it. It was the exact opposite of personalisation. So in this case, place an ad in the Guardian, you flick through it, you come across it, and what you've got is an amazingly engaging headline, an amazing engaging image. You've got a great deal of copy in the style, I suppose, of advertorial or native advertising, and direct response mechanism there. What a fantastic opportunity and way to engage with people. And for that reason, I think the print age was brilliant. But the thing about print was it was pretty expensive, and then along came job boards, and they were amazing. And the reason they were amazing was that they were cheap. And that was actually quite a significant change. But also, for the first time, you had jobs all in one place. This screen grab, does anyone actually remember what frames were here? But anyhow, this is from '96. It was an amazing time and an amazing change. The problem with job boards is that suddenly you had an erosion of brands. Print ads had been great about organising brands, and so what you had was a lack of branding. And I'm going to show you, I hope, I'm going to show you a video from the time that kind of sums this up. I might do. Oh no, I did it wrong. Maybe not. Yes.
Hey Pete, something ain't right, man. Look at this. Wouldn't just survive the work week, better job in those and careerbuilder.com has the most.
Well, what I think is amazing about that particular advertisement is that what you have there is a whole bunch of people willing to throw themselves off a cliff to avoid a day's training, and that is kind of the right the opposite of kind of like some of the branding messages most people are trying to put out today. It was all about numbers, and there was a lack of branding. So this was also the age that, in which you started to have employee branding was really taking off, and these were two of the first ads websites I ever worked on. Enron, whose central core branding messages was about innovation and the future. Enron, that didn't go very well, but actually we were quite lucky because we got our bills paid just before they went under, and that's Vodafone. So you had certain changes about that time as job boards came along. And then in about 2009, and absolutely another amazing change, because suddenly you had Adsense came onto the scene. And what was incredible about this was for the first time you could target individuals on a contextual basis. So you could actually reach out to people who weren't actively looking for a job, and it made a tremendous difference in the way that we did recruitment. Moving on from that, in about 2011 to 14, you have what I call the LinkedIn age. And what I've got a picture of a sweet shop here, because what was incredible about this was suddenly you went from a scenario when I started in 89 where people would never share their details on the their detailed CVs with you, to a scenario where you had loads and loads of candidate details available, and that was another amazing transformation. Bringing it up to 2015 though, I think that it's fair to say that there's not a particularly dominant type of media, and good news, people have stopped talking about digital media or social media, and they're just talking about media. And I think there's an increasing focus on, you know, the use of brand and engagement in terms of like media interactions. But most significantly, of course, there's ever more candidates to connect with, and I think this makes this the age of the infinite candidate. And I think if you look at LinkedIn, there's lots of candidates there, but if you add to that, you know, social media, CV databases, it is arguable that very soon you'll be able to reach any candidate you want directly. And so you have, I've shared this before, but I think it's a nice comment from this guy, Dr. John Sullivan, basically saying, you know, finding talent is increasingly easily, and he's actually suggesting that you'll be able to automate that very soon. So you want any candidate, you'll just be able to automate a program, and you'll be able to find that candidate, which is great in many ways. But the thing about that is that you're not really making, just having someone's details, you're not making a particular connection with it, with that individual. That's where personalization comes in. Now this is I'm not saying personalization is new, and this is an ad that we ran when we were called RSCG in New York, and what they've done is they've actually identified 4 people they wanted to recruit and put the ad in Advertising Age. That's amazing personalization. I'm not sure of the motivation. I probably would have sent them a letter or phoned them up. But here's this ad in Advertising Age interacting with those people. It's great personalisation, but what this lacks, I suppose, is any sort of contextualisation, in the sense that we don't know how Jim Elliott was feeling when he saw that ad in the first place. He may have been in a good place, he may have been in negotiations with his current employees, anything could have happened. So this might have been pleasing for Jim, or it might not have been pleasing for Jim, which means that I think we're starting to move away from personalisation into the field of contextualisation. And by personalisation I mean the experiences we get all the time now from things like Amazon and Netflix, which is good because they look at what you've done in the past and they make some guesses as to what you might like in the present. But now we're starting to move away from that into a scenario where, from a kind of a candidate point of view, you're going to get messages based as much on what you've done in the past, but putting that in the context of where you are at the moment. So, and there's a number of reasons why this can happen from a candidate point of view. For example, we know a lot about individual candidates. Going back to these big CV databases and LinkedIn, they give us a lot of profile data about the individual, which, for example, we'll know if you're a Java programmer and how many years experience you have. That's useful in terms of like devising an advertising message, but we also know about your behaviours, the kind of media you've been looking at, how you've interacted with those media. We know about your historical data, where you've worked in the past, perhaps even a little bit about where you want to work in the future. And we know your situational data, physically where you might be at a particular time. And you can put all this stuff together to form quite powerful recruitment messages. Now, this obviously isn't particularly new, but I think what is becoming more sophisticated in what people are able to do. And certainly at Havas, we're developing a number of products that are making this more and more sophisticated. This isn't a particularly brilliant example from its KFC, but it shows kind of what I mean by contextualization, in the sense that the messages that KFC send out throughout the day vary depending on weather conditions and time of day, for example. Now, I think the thing about contextualization, however, is that it's great that you can get a message to in front of someone, and it is kind of like the kind of message they might want to interact with, but it's not going to make any difference unless they care about the nature of the message that you're firing across. And again, so what I'm suggesting here is that an really increasingly important role of media is to create this meaningful connection between a candidate and a message. It's a great facilitator of these kind of meaningful connections. Now, this wasn't written by me, but it says down here, a meaningful connection, an emotion, a unique moment of magic created by a content-powered, data-driven interaction. Now, the powered data-driven interaction is actually what they're talking about media, and the use of all this data we have about individuals actually to create media messages that really resonate with potential candidates. And I think for me, you can see this happen right across the media spectrum, the ability of media to facilitate these kind of like emotional connections. You can obviously see it in things such as paid media, but increasingly in shared and social media, in the media that is owned by individuals, for example, in employee profiles, and in earned media, which is things such as referrals and advocacy. Right across the spectrum of media, you have these opportunities to create these connections. And you can see this in examples. I've got here some work that Havas have done for Emirates, and you can see that across all these different points, they're interacting and starting to create this emotional engagement. In outdoor, which we're going to hear about in a moment, through their employee branding, in their paid space, through things such as sponsorship of Arab Idol, in the shared space, which is kind of like sports sponsorship, for example, and in the earned space, where they've got this thing here about tattoo loyalty. I actually don't know what tattoo loyalty is, but I suspect it's tattooing. Is this tattooing Emirates on your arm or something? Because that actually is brilliant earned media. So, all these things are happening, and there's never been such a fantastic array of media vehicles to connect with people with. And what's happening at the moment, of course, is that these four spheres of media are starting to converge on each other. And so right at the heart of this, you've got content, which is being shared across all these things, creating, I suppose, what you could call a content landscape. And within those kind of like that sharing pattern, you've got advertising, you've got embassies, for example, Facebook, Twitter, again sharing this content in slightly different ways. But my point here is that we're moving towards a much more integrated age of media. And just the final point I wanted to make is that I think that in the integrated age, as I'm describing it, media has never been so important, because it's never been so intrusive as it is at the moment. And what you have now is a situation whereby media and content are working very smoothly together. Certainly in Havas, the two sides of the business that used to be apart are increasingly working as one. Contextualization obviously has a very important part to play in this, and as it gets more sophisticated, people are going to get messages that really resonate them, because they'll be connecting with them in media that they like at a time that they're particularly responsive. And already you can see this with with a lot of the services that are being offered that actually use algorithms to anticipate, depending on what media people are interacting with, to anticipate are they ready to move a job. However, my final point is that while data is really, really important, if you go back to that very first recruitment ad I show you, which from The Guardian, that wasn't based on data. There was a little bit of data behind that, but that was much based on human intuition, and I think you don't want to take away that human element from the meeting. No matter how important data is, it is still that human spark that will give you the brilliant result rather than the standard result. And I think ultimately it's humans working with data that will make the future of media very, very exciting. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Thank you.